Serious. Overnight hikers, hunters and outdoors people of Reddit, what creepy things have you experienced in the forest? Part 2. Years back. I was out solo backpacking in the Pecos wilderness of northern New Mexico. Camping about 6 hours hike from the nearest pavement way up past Puerto Namb. I typically used an enclosed camping hammock. Lightweight, bug-proof, packs up small with a rain fly. No need to carry a paddle mat. Just need 2 trees. As in perfect for solo. When you're in it, with the full fly on, you don't have any real visibility around you. The top was totally enclosed by a bug screen. To get inside, you sort of climbed into a slit in the bottom and then your weight pulled and held it closed. It worked well, but it was a convoluted process to get in and out of. I picked a spot just at the edge of the tree line so I could cook on the edge of the meadow with a view of Santa Fe Baldy. Ate dinner, cleaned up, bags and trees, looked at probably a billion stars, and then processed myself into the hammock for the night. At some point, in the pitch black, I bolted awake. The crunching footsteps in the pine needles around me. It was the kind of awake where you go from fast asleep to instantly hyper-aware, but totally frozen. I make absolutely no sound. I can't look outside, lighting a light would only illuminate the hammock like a lamp and leave me totally blind to the surroundings. The crunching continues, as if it's circling the hammock. I'm not sure how long I held my breath. The crunching is right alongside me. I have zero clue what it is. Suddenly, something pushes against the side of my hammock, and in the hammock, that means it pushed against me. I could feel its body heat. This isn't a tent wall, where you can cower away from it if you lean, the hammock moves with you. Whatever it was seemed to use its snout to nuzzle or root against the side of the hammock, like it was sniffing something out. I was still holding deathly still, trying to come up with a plan to get away. Which would involve trying to slash the opposite side with my knife. The thing pushes again and slides up the side of the hammock. I could feel the texture of its fur, hide, hair, whatever scraping against the nylon side. I hear a sharp snort and it crunches away. I'm not sure how long I stayed absolutely still, but at some point, the sun came up and I ventured into the daylight. I looked around the campsite and could find no evidence of a visitor. The tree line edge was floored with pine needles, so there were no prints or tracks. None of my other gear was disturbed, the guy lines for the fly were all still tight, and I didn't see any marks on the side of the hammock. Didn't even find a broken twig. I'm not sure it even happened. I've never slept in a hammock since. About a year ago I was camping along the PCT in Washington. It was late October and getting to around freezing in the middle of the night in the mountains. So there were no other people, which was what I wanted. I got to the trail late and hiked with my dog for a while in the dark with my headlamp. We found a place that was a few hundred feet from a small river. It wasn't loud, but you could hear it. I get to work starting a fire when my dog suddenly starts barking. I'm pretty paranoid, so I keep a 3800 lumen flashlight and a big knife on me. I whirl around and shine the light and grab the knife. Nothing. I sweep the trees, looking for the reflection of eyes. Still nothing. Dog's on alert but not barking. I get back to work and this happens a few times. Each time I grab the knife and light but can't see anything. Eventually I search the brush around the clearing, but still nothing, so I go to bed thinking maybe something small. 1 a.m. and I'm woken up by something rustling around outside. By the sound I think it was probably the size of a coyote. I don't get out of the tent. About 3 a.m. I'm woken up by a loud screech and 2 large animals bolting through my clearing. It's cold and dark and most of the way up a mountain, so there shouldn't be anything. I'm a little freaked out, so I grab my knife and listen in the tent. There's a screech in the distance, then nothing. Ultimately I wake up and it's raining, so no prints and nothing else happened. But sure freaked me out. If I had to guess, I'd say a goat or something with hooves became a midnight snack for whatever was lurking around my site. We were camping at Long Beach, Washington for the Kite Festival and decided to take a late night drive. We found ourselves on some back roads in the woods, cruising along slowly with no music on and the windows down. No other cars but us, and suddenly everything just felt wrong. It was dark, but the light seemed different somehow. I remember the hair on the back of my neck standing up and just having the thought. This isn't right, we shouldn't be here. I look over and my wife is wide-eyed and clearly feeling the same way. I decided to pull over so I could turn around and head back the way we came. Then we noticed deer were coming out of the woods and standing on the sides of the road, and they were just staring at us. Realized the woods are oddly quiet, which just made things seem more strange. Look up and the branches were full of birds on both sides of the road. There must have been hundreds of them, all perched and alert. My wife said, "We need to go." So we left. Eventually, once we had gone far enough, everything seemed normal again. I'm a pretty big fan of the idea of multiple worlds dimensions, and honestly wonder if we accidentally drove through a in spot and briefly wound up somewhere we shouldn't have been. Mind you, this was not in a forest, but surrounded by tall dead grass by cliffs over the ocean. I went backpacking on my home island in Hawaii. There's this trail that goes all the way around the island called the King's Trail that has been known to have a particular bloody past, with many murders happening near it in one particular area. Now covered by lava in the 1970s. The legend goes that if you sleep or are awake and you see men walking along with clubs torches, you are near death. I was off the beaten path about 12 miles from a highway and another 15 to any hospital. It was 2 a.m, I got up to take a leak about 10 feet from my tent. It was a nearly moonless night with a few clouds. I finish up, go back to my tent, and just as I am getting inside I hear rustling, then grunts. Which sounded almost human. I quickly grabbed a knife and a flashlight. Leaving the tent, I quietly slinked into the tall grass opposite to where I heard the sound. I stand still, trying to pinpoint the location. 10 minutes go by, the sound picks up again. At this point I'm on my hands and knees circling around behind to where they were coming from. Could have been no more than 20 feet. I throw a large rock 5 feet from where I could perceive the sound coming from. As soon as the rock hit the ground, the largest boar I had ever seen bolts out of the long grass. I watched it run for a bit until it disappears from my view 200 meters away. In the moment I felt nothing, I felt ready. But as soon as the boar had left, panic set in, heavy breathing, sweating. The full 9 yards. I immediately packed all my stuff and moved right onto a beach where there was no grass or trees for 100 feet. My first overnight backpacking trip with a friend. We're both women. I parked my car at a trailhead, loaded my gear into friend's van, and we headed to another trailhead to sort our stuff, sleep in the van, and get an early start the next morning. This trailhead is very popular, just off a main highway. Plan was to then backpack through a pass back to my car. It's starting to get dark and we have everything pulled out and the last people are coming down to their cars. It's dark now and there were a couple of cars left in the lot. Then I noticed 2 older men hanging around. They did not look like hikers and were not acting like hikers. They would talk to each other, but at an oddly far distance from one another and were facing us, not each other. Every time I looked in their direction, they were standing in a different spot, watching us. I instantly felt danger. Like electricity buzzing on my skin. My friend was oblivious, rationing food or something. Next thing they started talking to her, asking strange questions and making comments about a big party and wondering if the trailhead gets chained at a certain time. I don't know, as I'm writing this, it sounds innocuous, but the dudes were creepy and fanned out in a strange way. I felt hunted. My friend, without saying a word, started throwing our gear back in the van. We hauled ass, messed up our packing. I held my knife and tried to shine my headlamp on it in their direction as much as possible. Truly ready to fight or flight. Dudes stood there and didn't back away. We drove off before I even had a chance to close my door. I've never been so angry. It sucks to live in a world in which you must fear for one's safety. A few months ago my friend and I went to hike Pikes Peak near Colorado Springs. The hike up this mountain is a literal marathon with about 7,000 feet of vertical gain, and the general rule of thumb is that if you're not up and back down below the tree line by noon, then you are at risk of being struck by lightning. So we made the decision to hike the whole thing in one day by starting at 11 p.m. the night before. So we roll up on the trailhead at 10:30, only to find that the parking lot is completely empty. Which I found very odd for a 14-hour trailhead on a Friday night in late summer. I had done nighttime hikes of other mountains, but the parking lot was usually at least half full at all times, especially in the late summer in Colorado. That made me feel a little uneasy, but I shrugged it off and we started the hike. We started off at a pretty good pace, getting about 5 miles in within the first couple hours, so at about 1 a.m. at this point. We are walking along a narrow part of the trail that has a large rock cropping to the right of us. As we pass it, we hear a scraping noise followed by some rustling of bushes, then silence. That freaked me out a bit, but I told myself it was a deer and that we must have spooked him, and we continued along. For the next couple of miles I kept hearing little noises off in the distance to our right. About an hour later at 2 a.m. we had just passed Bar Camp, which is about 7 miles from the trailhead, still without seeing any other human being other than my friend. Even the campsite was deserted. Anyway, I'm walking along the trail about 2 to 3 meters ahead of my friend when I look up a little and see 2 glowing white circles floating in the darkness on the trail about 15 meters ahead of me. My heart sunk and I stopped dead in my tracks. My friend asked me why I stopped and I told him to point his headlamp, which was brighter than mine, up the trail. We saw that the two glowing orbs belonged to a mountain lion. At this point I was just frozen looking at him thinking. Fuck. That's the last thing I want to see out here. He was quite aware of our presence as well. He stared at us for about 15 seconds and then he retreated into the darkness behind some trees. At this point, without saying a word, I take out a thing of bear mace and hand it to my friend and we turn around on the spot and begin hiking back down the mountain at a very brisk pace. I was looking down trail and my friend spent about 80% of that time walking back to back with me to make sure it couldn't jump us. We made it back down to the trailhead at about 3:30, counted our blessings and went home. Overall the hike was a very unsettling experience, being deep into the forest without coming across any other people, especially when you would expect to meet others, is uncomfortable. Let alone being staked by one of the most dangerous predators in North America. I know that most of the time mountain lions don't attack humans. But I've also been told that if you see a mountain lion, then they've been aware of your presence for a good while prior to that. And if they make their presence known to you, it's usually a warning. So I can only assume that all the noises I heard that night were from the mountain lion stalking us. Also the next day we found out why we were alone on the trail. Earlier that day an elderly man had a heart attack and died on the trail, so the trail was closed, but we missed that memo since we got up there so late. My sister and I went camping in the North Cascades in Washington state. This was our first time camping, just us two. The first night we set up our tent and went to sleep. The next day we woke up early and hiked Sourdough Mountain. At night when we got back to the campsite at around 8, it looked like our stuff had been rifled through. Nothing had been taken. We brushed it off mostly because we were insanely tired and sore. We went to sleep. I woke up at around 3 am to the sounds of loud singing. At this point I'm just annoyed because I'm exhausted. After listening closer I realized it was not a language I am familiar with and the man sounded absolutely insane. I'm increasingly getting more and more terrified because the singing kept getting louder and quieter, like he was walking around singing. I wake my sister up to listen to the singing and literally at this exact time we hear the sound of tree branches snapping. Someone or something was walking around our tent. At this point we're freaking out. Suddenly a flashlight is shining in on my side of the tent. Like he was looking in. There was no flashlight shining up until this point. He couldn't have been more than 5 feet away from my side of the tent. We left all of our stuff in the tent and booked it to the car. The spots for parking were right behind the tent, so I shined my car's brights at whoever it was, and it was a large man in a hoodie unzipping our tent. Who knows what he wanted, but it was terrifying. Also, I think the crazy singer saved us because it woke us up before the man got into our tent. I live near the Canadian border in central Washington state. More bears than people in my little valley. One afternoon, I was walking up a hill near my house and saw, after passing a large tree, about 20 feet away, a very large cougar. My estimates for size, probably very accurate, are weight 175 to 190 pounds. Length from nose to tip of tail very close to 9 feet. Thick. Bulky. Male, muscles on the back of his neck like a large pit bull or breeding bull. Not a scar on him that I could see, no chunks out of his ears from previous fights. Hair was long and perfect. You could see the muscles rippling through hair that was 1.5 to 2 inches. He was coming down the hill and had just stepped from behind a tree of his own. We both froze in our tracks. He was staring at me like I had never been stared at in my life. Intense, X-ray vision, never blinking kind of stare. It knocked the wind out of me. We stood there, frozen, staring at each other intensely, for about seemed like 15 or 20 minutes. Neither one of us moved. He was slightly higher on the hill, looking down at me. Maybe 1 or 2 feet taller than I was. He seemed to like that. Neither one of us moved. I had a 9mm pistol in a shoulder holster, but I didn't pull it out. I could have very quickly, but probably not quickly enough considering they can jump really far. It was a very intense sharpening of the senses and perceptions. Probably the effects of adrenaline. It was like time stood still and I could count every hair on his face. After 15 minutes or so, to my great relief, he slowly blinked once. Still staring, however. I felt like the spell had been broken though. He took a deep breath and slowly and very smoothly turned uphill and walked away at a pretty good clip, never looking back. It's been 3 years now and I have seen his tracks twice. One of my neighbors got a picture of him from his trail cam. So he's still here. Sometimes I think he's around, but it's impossible to tell. I don't know how anybody else would react to that, but for me it was a very creepy encounter, but at the same time I realized how lucky I was to have had that encounter. I love this place because he's here. The bears too. had some encounters with them too. But whatever you think, and whatever you have heard, the male cougars in the wilderness are the apex predator in the northern woods. I have seen a whole lot of cougars in zoos. Nothing in a zoo can even come close to this guy. He was the most perfect and terrifying thing I have ever seen. Supremely confident. I was in Lincoln State Park in southwestern Indiana. My family and I were staying in cabins they have there, so it's not exactly the most remote area, though there is a lot of wooded land. I took a hike all alone to the fire tower, which I've done dozens times before, and made it to the very top. I enjoyed the view for a bit and then climbed down and started going back because it was getting dark. I was walking on the trail not far from the tower when all of a sudden I felt this great sense of warning and terror. It was a suddenly random huge wave of terror and dread I have never felt. It was like some sudden spidey sense kicked in and it telling me to get out of there now or I was going to die. I didn't fight it and started running back to the campgrounds and then heard something moving through the woods like it was running alongside the path. I looked to my right and saw a very big brow blur and what looked like a giant brown arm flail about, and then whatever that thing was veered off and quickly moved away from. That didn't comfort me at all, and I went into a flat-out sprint at a speed that would probably rival Usain Bolt and didn't stop until I got to the trailer camping area, where I finally had to catch my breath. To this day I think that it might have been a Bigfoot, as the only other plausible explanations are that it was a brown bear, which is near impossible as Indiana only has an occasional black bear, and those are much smaller. It could have been a person, but it would have to be a big person, as in 7+ foot tall bodybuilder, and I don't think there are any 7+ foot tall bodybuilders that like to wear brown clothes and then go mess with people in the woods, and it also doesn't explain the sudden wave of sheer terror I felt. It's the only time I've ever had any type of sudden strong spidey sense like that in my life. My boyfriend, an experienced camper, and I, never camped before, decided to go camping at a local lake early October. We did all the typical glamping prep, with plans for s'mores, campfire food, and eventually sleeping in a tent on the bank of the lake. However, timing was not on our side, and we only got to the campsite about 30 minutes before dark, so we rushed to set everything up. For context, I am a scaredy cat who is not a nature person and practically had to be convinced to go camping. I had full trust that everything was going to work out, and any ill feelings was just because of me overthinking and generally being inexperienced. But back to that night. We had eaten dinner and decided to go into the tent to hang out until we went to sleep. It was eerily quiet outside the tent, and the only thing we could hear was the wind against the rain cover of the tent. I realized that my boyfriend was trying to cover how anxious he was because he kept stopping mid-conversation, wide-eyed, to listen to any small noise outside. I jokingly made a comment about skinwalkers, and I could tell that really freaked him out. He also is typically a person who blasts music but asked if he could turn it off, which was out of character. Around 9:30 we decided to go to sleep, and it being a small tent I could hear his breathing. He is typically the type to fall asleep in 5 minutes, but we both stayed awake for almost an hour attempting to sleep. He eventually broke the silence by telling me we had to leave because he felt like someone was outside our tent. I quickly agreed, and boy oh boy, there was nobody we could see, but we both felt undeniably not alone. Another thing was after we got back to our place, he was telling me about how he was thinking of where the hatchet we had was and how he could defend us if need be. This is extremely out of character because he is a 6'5" pacifist who prides himself of being able to use words to avoid conflict. Especially because he has always been extremely comfortable in nature and woods in general. Hearing that from him made it even more clear the headspace that place put us in. It really put us both in the fight or flight mentality. The entire night felt like the first 5 minutes of a supernatural episode. We grabbed all our stuff and ran back to the car, and we both didn't relax until we were out of those godforsaken woods. It may not seem like a huge deal because nothing explicitly happened, but the fact that both of us had such an overwhelming sense of anxiety and genuine fear for no explicit reason was one of the most terrifying things I have experienced. My buddy was visiting me when I was living in Santa Fe. He wanted to do something at night, and we decided to go in the forest just northeast of town. We chose to just pull off on a random pullout in the road. We got out of the car, carefully crossed a little creek by walking along a log, and headed down the left side of the path. We went for a while until we found old animal bones and decided to head back. There was a road not too far away, so we felt safe just wandering at night. Once we found our way back, we stopped and had a conversation for a while. At no point up till now did we notice anything particularly strange, no animals to spook us or weird noises. We were headed back to the car when I pointed out we hadn't taken the right path, just the left. I led my buddy down the path with my head down telling a story when he says my name in a stern way. I stopped and looked up to see, I shit you not, a glowing 3-foot child-looking thing not 2 feet away from me. He had no face and was dressed in this weird white tunic-looking thing. He was glowing head to toe in a weird bluish staticky looking color. I looked up and stared at it for what felt like an eternity, but what was really just a split second. We quickly turned around, completely jumped the creek that we carefully crossed over last time. Both of us, soaking in river water, ran into the car and sped away. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please drop a like, and to stay up to date with my latest videos, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the button under this video.